This is Wormwood Scrubs prison. It was constructed in the 1870s and it was probably the first prison in Europe that could be defined as a supermax super jail. The architect of this prison, the person who actually designed it, was an individual called Major General Edward Duquesne, and in fact the street in which this prison is situated is named after him. During the 19th century, poor rural workers and tenant farmers were driven off their land by rich landowners under the Enclosure Act, whereby common free land was stolen from the peasants. You then had a great influx of the rural poor into the urban centres like London. And it was also a time of the creation of the Vagrancy Act. So these people, just by being poor and destitute, were criminalised. And many of them found their way into these type of institutions. Children were actually imprisoned in this institution up until the mid-1980s on what was called the Borstal Boys Wing. I was first imprisoned in this jail when I was 15 years old, and we were sent here by the courts to be assessed for Borstal training. So you can imagine the traumatic impact that would have on children imprisoned as very, very young teenagers. A very, very traumatic experience. What particularly distinguished this prison for its brutality was an inquiry by the police in 1990 into claims and allegations that prison officers here were running a regime of terror in the segregation unit. And there were claims that apart from brutalising prisoners, they were also murdering them. So they were beating them up, hanging them from a cell window, and then the doctor would confirm that these prisoners had committed suicide. This had gone on for a number of years. Eventually there was a police inquiry and 5 or 6 prison officers were prosecuted. Things really haven't changed much here since the 1990s, when the place was being terrorised by prison officers. In 2018, a black prisoner held there, Winston Augustine, was starved for 3 days, denied medication for kidney stones, and was in extreme pain. And eventually he committed suicide. And during the inquest into his death, the conclusion of the inquest was that he'd been treated horrendously. And the reason for that was that, like all British prisons, racism and the racist victimisation and discrimination against black and ethnic minority prisoners is systemic in these institutions. Subsequent inquiries and investigations into this prison have consistently reported that it's massively overcrowded, infested with vermin, and extremely high levels of violence. This prison should be closed down in the interest of human rights.